Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Trole Chaim with your host, Rabbi Anibal and Chag Chanukah Sameach, or as my t-shirt says, Feliz Chanukah. How is everyone doing? Are you having a good Chanukah this year? I hope so. Winnipeg is a little cold, so not so easy to do things outdoors. In fact, we are waiting for a blizzard just to make it even more interesting. So, unfortunately, a lot of people that they were hoping to travel for the holidays, they may have to reschedule. I don't know. I never like to hear that. You know, people work so hard during the year, they plan holidays, they want to go, and then they have to cancel or take too much, or being stressed about possible cancellations. And we send everybody blessings. If you have plans to travel, stay safe, and I hope you can do it and be with family, with friends. You can relax for these upcoming holidays. Let's see who is here. Nice and early, Roberto Franco. He wrote Chag Chanukah Sameach with a J. That tells you that he speaks Spanish. Otherwise, it would be Jag Chanukah Sameach. But I also spell like that, because in Spanish we have the letter Ch. In English, it doesn't exist, so you have to improvise with CH, with an H. That's why nobody really knows how to spell Chanukah in English. You know that? Marta Castro is here as well. Welcome. Brendan David Grossman from Plano, Texas. Welcome. Karen Farkas from sunny Arizona. Sunny, with an emphasis on sunny. Randy Lodinger is here with us. Priscilla Kerr. He said, tell me about it. Let me highlight this. Priscilla said, tell me about it. I almost did not arrive yesterday. Our flights got delayed 4 times and arrived here at 4 a.m. Well, you're here. You're here. You were in the Bahamas. Okay. But you made it. Shelly Chochinov, apologies for coming late to class. You're not late because you haven't started. We were talking about weather. We are in Winnipeg. And that's what I discovered. In Winnipeg. We start all the conversations talking about weather or mosquitoes in the summer. So because it's in the winter, it's just weather. No mosquitoes. That's the blessing of winter. No mosquitoes. They freeze like everybody else. I hope you had a good time in Bahamas, Priscilla. I hope. And I hope you're having a good Chanukah. Here we are. Starting Parsha Miketz. Beautiful Parsha. This is the one that we started learning about the real destiny for little Joseph. It's not little anymore. But remember what happened, that he was sold by his brothers. He was bullied. He was put in jail. Not nice. But eventually, we know that he's going to become second in command for Egypt. Just one step below Pharaoh. Which is pretty impressive, if you ask me, for a young shepherd. I think he wasn't even a shepherd. He was just living at home, and his brothers were doing all the job, right? But he had a dream. He knew how to dream big. He knew that his destiny wasn't just sitting at home all day. Let's put it that way. And he had the great idea to share that with his brothers, and they didn't like it a bit. In fact, they were a little jealous of Joseph's aspirations, and they used to make fun of him. They used to call him names. One of the names that the Torah does tell us is he used to be called the dreamer, but like a bad thing. The dreamer. Here comes the dreamer. Look at him. And well, then we ended up learning in this parsha that there is nothing wrong with dreaming big. Sometimes we're afraid of dreaming big. It's almost like even if we believe in God, sometimes we think that, well, God is in control, God is powerful, but not that powerful to bring my dreams to fruition. You shouldn't think like that. For God, nothing is impossible. for God making a small miracle or a big miracle, or a small things to happen and a big thing to happen, there is no difference. There is no difference. God is God, right? So I always remember that. And if you have challenges, you have problems, never tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big your God is. That should be the right attitude. And on Chanukah, we learn that with all the miracles and everything, and we express gratitude to God. But let's go to this week's Parsha. Let me bring it here. Parsha Miketz. And starts with a very interesting thing because it's not so clear. That's why I believe it's interesting, because it's not clear. And let me explain. Howard Hemovich is here from sunny Miramichi, New Brunswick. Welcome. It says at the beginning of the Parsha, and at the end of 2 years, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing beside the Nile River. You know what happened, right? Remember the dream? The fat cows and the thin cows and stuff. But what is not clear, it says at the beginning, at the end of 2 years. 2 years starting from when? The Torah doesn't say. It's not clear about what 2 years are we talking about here. What's your theory? If you have a theory about what the Torah is talking about, let me know before I give you the answer. And the answer as explained by the rabbis. Right? Do you have any idea of what 2 years we are talking about here? So let's talk about something other than weather. Come on, guys. Let me know your theories. What 2 years are we talking about here? No takers? I know there is a delay between the time that I talk and the time that you write things on the chat. Oh, Karen Farkas, 2 years after the baker and the butler were released. Very good. Mitzvah point for you. Yeah, that seems to be the theory. And by the way, if you have no idea what the baker and the butler are or who they were, those were the ones that came to Joseph in jail. Joseph was in jail. And they came to him because I guess he already had a reputation that he was good at interpreting dreams. So they came to Joseph with their dreams, and Joseph interpreted their dreams. And basically, Joseph said to the baker, you're going to be put to death. And to the butler, you're going to go back to the old position, and you're going to keep serving Pharaoh. And what happened? Exactly what Joseph predicted happened. So Joseph remembered that, asked the butler, don't forget me. Remember, I made you a favor here. I interpreted your dream properly. Remember me, because I've been forgotten here in jail. This is something that we all have to remember before we continue with the class. We don't realize how the jail system worked back in the day. Okay? Today, we have this thing that if somebody is found guilty, it's going to be put to jail for a number of years as part of the punishment. Right? They said, because of what you did, you're going to be in jail for 25 years. Right? Well, back in the day in Egypt and in many other societies, jail didn't work that way. If you did something, it will be an immediate punishment, and then you will go back to your life, or unless the punishment is that you are going to put to death. So they will give you lashes. Some society, they will cut your hand. You know what I mean? But that's it. Jail time was not a punishment. Jail was a place where you will be thrown there until you have a date for your trial. It was to keep you in a place until you have your trial so you won't run away. That's what jail was. So remember what happened with Joseph. He was accused of raping Potiphar's wife, and he was taken to jail, and he was waiting for his trial. And it says that the Torah says that they forgot about him. So he never had a trial. So he couldn't leave the jail. So he was just there without any chance. So all he wanted, all what he asked the butler to do is please let them know that they forgot about me and I didn't have my fair trial. Okay? Because probably, I don't know what the punishment will be back in the day for attempt of raping somebody. Maybe he will be put to death. Maybe he will be given 50 lashes. Who knows? But he said, I want my trial. So that's what happened. He was forgotten there. So let's see what the rabbis understand about these 2 years. But Karen Farkas already gave us a spoiler. So Abraham, Ben Meir, even Ezra. Let me change this. I always like to do it like this. Look, I have my, there you go. So scriptures does not indicate the point from which these 2 years are reckoned. And it came to pass at the end of 40 years, for example, right, in the book of Samuel, and within 65 years in the book of Isaiah, and now it came to pass in the 30th year in the book of Ezekiel, right? Those are examples. In all these verses, scripture doesn't indicate the point from which the reckoning starts. And this is similar. So, however, it's possible that scripture's point for reckoning is the chief butler's release from prison or the day that Joseph was put into prison. So those are the two options that we have here. Either the very beginning of his incarceration or the moment when the chief butler was released after Joseph interpreted his dream. So I wanted to mention that those are the two theories about those 2 years. One is, as Karen said, from the time the butler was released, and the other one is maybe we are talking about from the beginning of the jail time for Joseph. Okay? So now, I wanted to share this with you because we have to start making sense now of everything that Joseph have to go through. I don't know if you realize this, that he had a very hard time from the time that he was sold as a slave by his brothers to the time that he was thrown into jail for a crime that he didn't commit. And yes, at the end, he ended up being the vice-regal of Egypt. But why so much suffering? Why so much suffering in the life of Joseph? So I wanted to spend a few minutes with all of you to try to understand that specific concept, okay? Why Joseph had to go through all this suffering in his life, okay? So let's start this. Let me start sharing an idea that we can find in this text called Da'at Zkenim. Was written around the 13th century. It says, God's method of applying reward and punishment cannot be compared to any human system of doing so. Okay? So basically, the Tosafists start with the comparing the way we humans understand reward and punishment and the way God understands reward and punishment. Because this is interesting because I know that many people struggle with the concept of God applying or granting reward and punishment, okay? And I understand that. Even if you are one of those, you still have to understand and to admit that we humans, we do use reward and punishment for everything. Sometimes you say, well, that's not the way I raise my kids. But we still use it to some extent. We believe on that. If you work in a place, usually workplaces will have some kind of a reward and punishment procedures for employees, right? You can get a bonus. You can be the employee of the month, or you can be suspended Depends on the circumstances. So this is very present and very real in human life. And there is at least one theological understanding that somehow God applies the same rules with us. But basically, what the Tosafists are saying here is, even if you believe that, the way we understand reward and punishment is not the same way that God understands reward and punishment. So let's see what it says. God's methods of applying reward and punishment cannot be compared to any human system of doing so. Human beings inflict wounds with a chisel, a metal, and pain-causing instrument, while they apply only a flimsy plaster to heal the wound. Okay? Do you understand this? In other words, what it says is that our capacity as humans to inflict pain and suffering is way bigger than our capacity to heal. Let's try to understand the principle behind these words. We really know how to inflict punishments and pain, but we are not so good at healing the wounds, right? Usually our methods to heal the wounds are very superficial. We don't go all the way to the root to create real healing. Okay? Have that in mind. But now, God inflicts a wound that is superficial, like the application of a plaster, but when it comes to healing, he uses immediately effective means. So in other words, it's that God is all the opposite. When God applies punishments or suffering to us, it's going to be superficial compared with the end result of the healing process. Okay? The problem is sometimes you have to wait until the end in order to appreciate that. Of course, when you're going through the difficult times, it feels that it's deep and unbearable. It says at the end of the process, you will realize that the healing process is way bigger than the original suffering. Okay, if you can understand this principle, let's continue. Joseph has been thrown into a pit on account of a mere dream he had dreamt concerning his brothers. He was healed by a dream dreamt by the man most powerful ruler on earth, the king of Egypt. In other words, God employed the heavy weight on earth in order to heal his wounds. The remedy God used to heal Joseph consists of parts of the weapon used to harm him. So many things here. Number one, it seems to understand that the original dream that Joseph had, and probably the way he understood it and the way he shared it, there is something that Joseph did wrong, and that it was a lesson that he had to learn. Okay? Even though the Torah doesn't give us any examples, but it's not that difficult to imagine that maybe he was a little bit arrogant about it, and he has to learn a little bit of humility, because Joseph had a very promising future. He would be the one bringing blessing and prosperity to millions of people in the Middle East during 7 years of famine. And in order to be successful at that, he needed to learn certain lessons that, number one, he could have learned at home, and number two, he needed to learn to be humble in order to be successful into that. So you will see that everything that happened to him was conducive to learn humility in order to be a more successful leader when he was needed during the 7 years of famine. Okay? But at the other time, another thing is, even though everything started with a dream that little Joseph, nobody Joseph dreamt, but now healing will come after a dream by the most powerful person in the world, which is interesting. That's what it says, going back to the text, when the text is comparing the two things, the flimsy plaster versus the big healing at the end. Shelly Chochinov, you have a comment. Let's see. You say, physical punishment leaves visible scars. Mental, emotional scars are visible but last just as long. Yes, I will highlight this for a second. And this is correct. This is correct, as we are going to see, for example, how in the lives of Jacob, for example, right, that he was wounded. Remember? He was injured by the angel when he fought all night, and then at the he was injured, and then he became crippled for the rest of his life from that. But nevertheless, remember the last words from Jacob to the angel. He said, I won't let you leave, I won't let you go until you bless me. In other words, he went through all this ordeal of suffering and pain and thing, and said, and in other words, Joseph was saying, if I went through all this, it has to be a blessing in disguise, but I can't see it. All I see is suffering. All I see is pain. All I feel is pain. So Jacob said to the angel, you know what? I'm glad all this pain is leaving. I'm glad all this suffering is leaving, but don't leave until I can learn something from it. Let me see the blessing. Let me see the blessing. So what I think it was amazing what Jacob said. I won't let you go until you bless me. We should do the same every time we go through difficult situations. Because eventually, difficult situations leave. Difficult situations disappear. Think about when I'm talking about the pandemics and the lockdowns. Because even though we can argue about the pandemic is still there or not, but I'm talking about when we had these hardcore lockdowns and we were all suffering. And then eventually it ended. And we started to socialize and interact with each other again. And we were so happy that it was over. But the question is, did you find a message from that? Did you learn something? Did you find the blessing behind that suffering? Did you find the blessing behind that pain? So this is exactly what is going to happen with little Joseph, but again, that is not little anymore. He went through so many different things, right? And the hope is that he learned the lesson, because he was going to need to understand that lesson in order to be a successful leader in the future. And he was a successful leader, so that means that he did understand, right? And go tell Joseph, when he was sold as a slave by his brothers, that eventually he was going to become the prime minister of Egypt, and he's going to be probably one of the richest people in the world back then, and he was going to have a beautiful family, and he was going to see his father again, and he's going to reconcile with his brother. He will, if somebody will say that to Joseph back then, he will laugh at you and said, you are nuts. That is never going to happen. And yes, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. So let's continue. Let's continue getting inspiration from the rabbis. Okay. Okay. According to a midrashic approach in Tanhuma Miketz 1, the wording of the Torah here may teach us the following. The words at the end of 2 years are a reminder of Job 28:3. God sets bounds for darkness. To every limit man probes, to rocks in deepest darkness. So in other words, what this rabbi is saying here, and this is very interesting. And I'm going to go back to this text. It says, at the end of 2 years, it means that there is always an end for the suffering. And that end was already set up by God. So basically what God is saying here is it's going to be 2 years. And then it's going to be done. It's not going to be forever. There is always a limit. Even with Job, if you remember the story of Job, he suffered but it was a limit to that. It was a limit to that. And it's a very interesting thing. One day maybe that is a fascinating thing to study, the story of Job, and how some people will say, well, but that was the Satan. Remember the Satan with an angel. The Satan who do it, but they said, the Satan didn't do it, because even the Satan has to ask permission to God to do something. We don't believe in Judaism that there are independent forces in the universe. God is in control of everything. God is in control of everything. We don't have God and the devil. Everything comes from God, which is challenging but fascinating. So, Howard, you have something here. Let's see. When I think of Joseph and the prison, I always compare it in my mind to Nelson Mandela, who was 26 years in prison, and when he came out, he became a leader of his country. Both went to prison for crimes arguable that they committed. I think maybe our Creator was protecting them in the prison until the right time. That's very interesting, Howard. It's sometimes I believe that we do have to try to make sense of things that happen, but we can only, it's very personal, and I usually think that it's very dangerous to try to guess the why things happen for other people, which in this case it's interesting because we are talking about a role model, and when you're talking about the role model, then there is something there that it can be inspirational for you. But in general, this principle is something that we have to apply to our lives, because we go through things that only we know. There are many things that we are enduring that nobody knows. Sometimes it's our deepest secret, and that's okay. That's okay. But it's up to us to try to make sense of why we are struggling with specific things and what is there for us to learn. So in this case, because it's a story from the Bible, I believe that yes, we need to do that exercise with Joseph. So his story could be inspirational to us. But in this case, this Rabbi Bechaya ben Asher ibn Alawa, he would say, by the way, he was also known as Rabbeinu Bechaya, Rabbeinu Bachya. Sometimes you will find him with that name. What he's saying is that wording of the opening words of Parsha Miketz is a reminder that everything has a set time. Even our redemption from the challenges also has a set time. The problem is God's timeline is usually not our timeline. If it's up to us, we would like to speed up everything. But God has the big picture, and sometimes God knows why we need the things when we need it. Okay? Anyway. So, you see, going sometimes through difficulties is a way for us to either strengthen or improve certain things in our life. Let me share with you the words of the Marzu, the Rabbi Zev Wolf Windhorn of Vilna, where he was understanding or explaining the words of Proverbs 14:23, where it says, in all work, in Hebrew, Bechol Etzev, in all work there is profit, but mere talk produces only poverty. And here is interesting because he says Etzev, translated here as work, could also mean mourning or worry, as in the second book of Samuel. Thus the verse alludes to the fact that Joseph gained through his difficulty. So, if you translate Proverbs 14:23 as in all difficulties there is profit, or in all challenge there is profit, or in all pain there is profit, then it totally changes the teaching of the book of Proverbs in this specific verse. But again, this is something that is personal. This is something that it should be part of our conversations with God. Right? it should be uh, um, it should be part of our conversation with God. We should ask God. I believe when we pray to God, we should ask God to help us understand this. It's okay to say to God, why? Why do I have to endure this? You are opening a door for God to answer that. Don't expect Morgan Freeman's voice to tell you what it is. I always imagine the voice of God like Morgan Freeman. I don't know why. But don't expect it like that. God has different ways to let us know things. We have to be sometimes aware of what's going around us, aware of our surroundings. It's a very interesting exercise. Okay, so here it says, Rabbi Zev Wolf is talking about Samuel 19:3. So let me show you what it says there. In the book of Samuel, the second book of Samuel, this is the verse that he's quoting. Thus the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard, it says that day the king was grieving for his son. And the word grieving here is ne'etzav, same verb, right? That it's also sometimes it's translated work. But here in this context is grieving and everything that implies pain, suffering, and everything. That's why the rabbi understood that. But it's interesting, going back here, then once we understand that concept, it says, in all pain there is profit. But it's up to you to discover how it is for your life. I don't think it's fair sometimes to try to read somebody else's life. We have to be very careful. We have to do it with ourselves. It's very personal. Very personal. Now, let's go back. Let's try to understand what was beneficial now in the specific circumstances of Joseph's life. Okay? So, the Midrash Rabbah says, why was it beneficial? Why was it so good about everything? Okay? It said, because as a result of that suffering, he took his daughter as a wife. Okay? He's talking about here that Joseph married Potiphar's daughter. Okay, Potiphar's daughter. It's a very interesting thing. You'll see in a minute what happened. But on account of that which Joseph said to the chamberlain of the cupbearers, 2 years were added for him to his incarceration. So we have two things here, and we are going to explain that in a minute. Number one, it says, because what Joseph said to the chamberlain or to the butler, okay, 2 years were added for him, which is a bad thing. Because it's a bad thing. According to the Midrash, God was ready to let him go from jail, okay? But he failed a test. We are going to see which test. He failed a test for what he said. For what he said to the butler. Remember what he said to the butler? Start thinking. I'm going to explain in a minute. But there is something else. Because he said, even though the next 2 years were a punishment for Joseph, an extra punishment. Remember, try to imagine 2 more years in jail. He needed at the same time those 2 years because it looks like the daughter of Potiphar was still underage. So in 2 more years, he will be at a marrying age to marry Joseph, which is very interesting. So even though he had to endure 2 more years in jail, something good came out of that, because it looks like for Joseph to marry Potiphar's daughter was a good thing, because Potiphar was a nobleman from Egypt, so it was a good thing. Karen Farkas, you said, so was his wife the daughter of the woman who accused him of assault? Yes. That's what it seems to be. Unless that he had a different, unless that Potiphar has more than one wife, but we don't know that. Yeah, you will see in the Torah that what was her name? Daughter of Potipharah. So it make the connection. It makes a connection with Potiphar. Yeah. So basically said, had he left jail at that time, he wouldn't be able to marry her yet. Okay. So let's see what he said to the butler, because this is the most important part here. He said something so bad that according to the Midrash, he was punished with 2 extra years of jail. That's pretty harsh. It's harsh in these days. It was probably even more back in the day. Those jails, I didn't even want to try to imagine, even though he was in charge of the jail, remember? But nevertheless, it wasn't a pretty place. Okay, what did he say? Okay, so this is Karen Farkas. This is for you. Genesis 41:45. Pharaoh called Joseph by the name Tsenaf Paneach and gave him as a wife Osnat, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Then Joseph went out through all the land of Egypt. Okay, so there you go, the connection. Okay, second half of this slide is what Joseph said to the butler. But remember me, when it goes well with you, and show me kindness, and mention me to Pharaoh, so he will release me from this prison. Marta Castro, you got it. Yeah, you got it at the time that I was explaining. Yes. Basically, let's try to understand, because I read this and I say, what's so wrong with that? He interpreted the dream of the butler and said, hey, you're going to be released from jail. I won't. You will. Just let them know that I'm still here, waiting for my trial. Right? But according to the rabbis, the fact that he said this to the butler showed that he was lacking on emunah, on faith. That Joseph, at least the way it's presented by the rabbis, was a religious person. He had a personal relationship with God. He trusted God. In fact, every time that he was interpreting a dream, he was saying, it's not me, the one who is going to interpret the dream. This is coming from God. So we know that he had a relationship with God. So why now, the rabbi said, he is all of a sudden doubting God, trying to ask a man to do something for him? You understand? You understand? He forgot God. But it's not that he forgot God. He thought that, well, maybe God can't do everything. And there are many people like that. Many people like they have faith on God, but only 90% of the times. Have you heard that? They have faith in God, but only 90% of the time. The other 10% of the time, don't. So God can do only 90% of the things. What kind of God is that? Right? So either God can do 100% of the things or nothing. That's the thing. So for a character like Joseph, that he was born to become a role model for the Jewish people, a role model of faith, of emunah. This was a failure. So he didn't pass that test. And he had to stay another 2 years until he will continue talking to God. Because one of the things that you have to understand, when you're in jail, what else do you have to do? It's like sometimes being in jail or in a hospital bed, we are sick. We don't have much to do. You don't have to be worried about your business. You don't have to be worried about being late to work or to school or to pay bills or to do grocery shopping. You don't have to do anything like that. So what can you do with your time? And the idea is when you have to do through situations like that, that's an opportunity to strengthen your emunah, your faith in God. So he was given another 2 years in order to work on this, to work on trusting God. Because what is coming to his life, to what's coming to Joseph's life is so big that he was going to need it. Yeah. So let's explain this a little bit. Rabbi Chaim Brisker posed the following question to a young student of his, the future famed Rabbi Shimon Shkop. Had Joseph made only one request from the chamberlain of the cupbearers, how many years would have been added to his term in prison? Yeah, you see, here he's mentioning the thing twice, not once. He said, remember me, number one, and then mention me to Pharaoh. 2 requests. So this is interesting. Here, a rabbi is trying to be tricky to his student. So he said, because Joseph made 2 requests, he was punished with 2 years. Can you see the logic? Can you follow the logic? So now the rabbi is going back here. He said, had Joseph made only 1 request to the Chamberlain, how many years would have been added to his term in prison? So Rabbi Shimon answered that since 2 requests were punishable with 2 years of imprisonment, it follows that for 1 request, Joseph will have been liable for 1 year. Wouldn't you say the same? Rabbi Chaim demurred. Rather, had Joseph made only 1 request, he would have not been liable at all, and nothing will have been added to his term of imprisonment. Why? Rabbi Chaim based his assertion on the explanation of his father. Joseph was punished for excessive reliance on the Chamberlain. It is possible that such excess was expressed only in his double request. Had he made only a single request of Chamberlain, it may have been deemed good and proper, and he would not have been punished at all. But he had slipped from his pinnacle of emunah, of faith, and he was thus punished for both requests. So what happened here is, God forbid, the Torah is not saying that we should never rely on people. It's not that you should stay at home doing nothing and hoping that God is going to provide you with everything. We still need to interact with other people. We still need other people to fulfill our divine mission. But the problem with Joseph, and what seems to be the case here, is that he was relying too much on people. Relying on people, or, when you say to somebody, please, can you do this for me? It's fine. The problem is when you keep insisting because you believe that God is not intervening in the situation. God is not part of it. So you really find every possible way to make it happen through human means. So basically, here we learn that when we talk about faith, when we talk about emunah, it doesn't mean that we never rely on people. It means that we should never rely excessively on people, and it should be a balance. And I hope that's clear. Okay, so the one who really understood the concept of faith, of emunah, if you ever want to study that, is no doubt Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Everything you can read about Rabbi Nachman of Breslov is amazing, even if it's just to make you think about faith and to make you think about the way we relate to God. One nice introduction to the work of Reb Nachman of Breslov, because sometimes if you go straight to Reb Nachman, it's difficult to understand. I will always recommend to start with somebody who uses Reb Nachman's principles into their teachings in a more accessible way. I don't know if you ever read the works of Rabbi Shalom Arush. It's an Israeli rabbi, for example, right? Let me. I have a slide here. Here he's teaching about the levels of emunah, or levels of faith, based on Rabbi Nachman's work. And this is very interesting. Let me read it for you. It says that there are 3 levels of faith, 3 levels of emunah. Number 1, belief in divine providence. So basically what it said is, if you believe that everything comes from God, you have faith. You have faith, no doubt. No doubt. If you believe that everything comes from God. Okay? Now I said that there is a higher level than that. There is a believing that everything comes from God and everything is for the very best. You see, it's not the same of believing that everything is coming from God and believing that everything that comes your way is for your very best. Because sometimes even if you believe that everything comes from God, we feel that, well, there is nothing good on what is happening to me. And that means that you have emunah, you have faith, but it's incomplete. So the next level is believing that everything's coming from God and everything is for the very best. But he said that there is an even higher level. And that is very difficult to attain. And that is that everything comes from God, but you can see why. You can see the purpose of everything that comes through your life. Remember when we're talking about that, trying to understand why Joseph was sold as a slave and thrown into jail. What was the message? It was the plea of Jacob to the angel, bless me before you leave, so I can understand why all the suffering. It's very difficult. But Reb Nachman would say, if you achieve that level, that's the highest level of emunah, the highest level of faith. You can always or ever achieve. Okay, so let me finish reading this paragraph. A person with upper level of emunah, with everything God does is for a specific purpose, right? Upper level emunah is constantly asking, what does God want for me? Such a person's thought is logical and straightforward as follow, right? You have to rely on observation. God exposes me to a certain event or experience in order to convey a message or to teach me something. And again, remember, this is for you. It's not up to you to try to understand somebody else's life. This is your own process. Nobody can do this for you. No rabbi can do this for you. You have to do it for yourself, right? Observation. Number 2, interpretation. I should do my best to relate to God's message to something in my life that needs reinforcement or improvement. Okay? Number 3, implementation. Either I need to correct a bad habit, atone for a transgression, strengthen my service for God in a particular area, or to awaken from my spiritual slumber, and so forth. There's an endless list there. Again, it's personal. Okay? And everything that Rabbi Arush writes is coming from the teachings of Reb Nachman of Breslov. For example, this is what Reb Nachman of Breslov taught. He said, we must all make an ongoing effort to observe the divine wisdom in everything and to connect ourselves to the divine wisdom in everything. When we do, the divine wisdom of our particular creation or event illuminates our brains and soul, drawing us closer to God. But the one who neither observes nor connects oneself to the divine wisdom of a particular creation or event resembles Esau, who scorned the birthright. In other words, we come to this world with this amazing superpower to be able to read God's messages to improve our lives. We have it. But because we don't nurture it, he said we are like Esau, that he has the birthright and he sold it for a plate of food. So we sell the capacity of connection with God for mundane experiences that they don't go anywhere. We trade it for instant gratification that it doesn't go anywhere. But we all have the power. I said, but why, Rabbi, I can never understand what God wants from my life. Then the rabbis will say, that should be the content of your prayers. You should pray to God to have emunah. So we pray for emunah. We pray for faith. We pray to be able to feel that everything comes from God, everything is for the very good, and everything has a purpose. Can you imagine your life if you can always feel that everything that happens to you, no matter what, is for the very best? And the problem is we suffer because we don't feel that way. And the rabbis say that to feel that way is a gift from God. It's a gift from God. But it's an amazing feeling to feel that no matter what comes our way, it has a purpose. If we can feel it, we'll never be anxious. We'll never be afraid. Right? But it's very difficult to attain. That's why Reb Nachman will say, you have to pray for it every day. God, give me faith. Give me emunah. And I don't know. I feel that, achieving that is something amazing. Shelly Chochinov, you said Joseph ego. He was remembering some good happens to you and responsible. Yeah. Joseph had an ego. Joseph had an ego, but eventually that ego was controlled and it was changed. So remember what happened at the beginning when he had this dream of his brothers all around him. Remember, he had a dream that he was in the middle, and around him was the sun, the moon, and the stars, and they were all bowing down to him. And he probably felt so important. I have all these people around me, and they are here serving me. And I guess that's the way he explained the dream to his brothers. That's why they hated him. Can you imagine if somebody says to you, hey, I had a dream that you're going to be my servant? You wouldn't like it a bit, right? And back then, remember, on top of that, Joseph's brother made him his favorite and thing. And on top of that, Joseph said, hey, you're going to serve me in the future. But the rabbi said that actually, Joseph got the interpretation of that dream wrong. Because yes, the stars, the moon, and the sun were around him, right? But they weren't there to serve him. They were there so he could serve them. And that's exactly what happened at the end of all this saga. When Joseph finally reconciled with his brothers, we meet a Joseph that he was in charge of Egypt, so he could serve the people of Egypt, and he could serve his family, providing them, blessing them, which is very interesting. That's why he needed to learn all these lessons, because everything that happened to him, it wasn't so he will be honored. It wasn't so he could be served. Everything has to be learned so he will be the one serving others. And it took a few years for him to get it right, but eventually he did it, because we see that that's exactly what he did. He became a person who was able to serve other people. So it was very, very interesting. Okay, and yeah, and Pharaoh was able to see that. You see, when Joseph said, therefore Pharaoh should look for a man both discreet and wise to put in charge of the land of Egypt. And we see that it looks like, well, here is Joseph again being Joseph, and here is again being arrogant, right? It looks like Joseph didn't learn anything during the last 2 years in prison, but the rabbis will say that I wanted to finish. Oops, let me move a little bit this. Otherwise you cannot see it, right? I want to finish with this text. We know that Joseph did learn that God exclusively controlled the success and destiny of all the world's inhabitants, as evidenced by his reply to Pharaoh's request. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I dreamt a dream, but no one can interpret it. Now I heard it said of you that you comprehend the dream to interpret it. Joseph answered to Pharaoh, saying, that is beyond me. It is God who will respond with Pharaoh's welfare. So we know, you can see that Joseph still understands that God is in control. Indeed, but stating so unequivocally that he played no active role in the deciphering of the dreams, he completely undermined the misconception that you comprehend a dream to interpret it. Okay? Likely destroying his last opportunity to ever be released from prison. Because, saying to Pharaoh, it's not me, the one who is going to interpret it. It's going to be God. You're talking to the God of Egypt. You're getting, Joseph just said, are you nuts? You're going to be put back in jail. Nevertheless, he said it because that's what he believed. So by doing so, demonstrated the completeness of his dependence of a divine resolution to his crisis, negating all reliance on his own action. Working within this mindset, Joseph's suggestion to Pharaoh regarding the viceroy did not constitute a breach. A lack of faith is not demonstrated by a particular action, but the mindset behind the action, giving Pharaoh the opportunity to release him while maintaining a complete and sovereign reliance on divine kindness is indeed the embodiment of exhibiting faith in God. So in other words, the fact that Joseph said, you should look for a man both discreet and wise, he's saying it from a position of humility. Because this phrase could be said out of arrogance or out of humility. And what we learn here is that finally Joseph was able to say things like this from a position of humility. Yeah, Shelley says it. He need to learn humility. We all have. We all have to do it. We all have to learn humility. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in tuning in this afternoon, for sharing this virtual classroom with me. And I hope you are going to have a fabulous rest of Chanukah. Eat a lot of latkes, lot of sufganiot. Light the candles. Remember, light the candles every night. And yeah, so I want to wish you Chag Sameach, and I want to wish you a Happy New Year. Actually, unless even though we still have one more class next Thursday before the New Year, so but just in case I don't see you, Happy New Year anyway. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember, stay safe, and hope to see you soon. And remember, give it the thumbs up for this video. Want to share it? You can always share this video with a friend. That would be great. And subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Happy Chanukah. Hope to see you soon.